The following is a presentation of the Black Hollywood Live Network, the first online broadcast network dedicated to African American entertainment. Hollywood Redefined. From Los Angeles, California, streaming live thanks to Akamai Technologies, this is Black Hollywood Live, Breaking Into, featuring in-depth interviews with today's most influential entertainment figures, highlighting their tips, tricks, and techniques on breaking into the entertainment industry.
You're listening to Black Hollywood Live.
And now, the host of Black Hollywood Live, Breaking Into.
Hey, here we go. It's another edition of Breaking Into here on Black Hollywood Live. I am your host, James Lott Jr. Welcome back. It is almost the end of January. We're moving right along. Second episode of the new year. So, of course, you can follow us on my Breaking Into page on Facebook. And on Twitter, I'm at Black Hope LA. That's BLAKHOPLA. Use the hashtag Breaking Into, and we can just continue discussion that happens today off camera. My guest today, I'm very excited to have on here. I'd like to try to bring you guys all kinds of people on here with all kinds of views and viewpoints and work, because it's very important. I love diversity. And my guest today is someone who's well-versed in all things Tupac. And we're going to talk about all his different credits when we're talking to him. There's a lot. But it includes an award-winning documentary he did, which I actually saw. I think I saw it in the theater, actually. So, Tupac Assassination. It was back in 2009. And his book is Tupac 187, The Red Knight, which he wrote with Michael Douglas Carlin. Is that correctly?
Yeah.
My friend here, Richard R.J. Bond.
How you doing?
Welcome.
Thanks
Now, do you like being called R.J. or I've been told you were R.J.
Everybody calls me RJ.
I'm calling you RJ.
That's it. Everybody just calls me RJ.
It's RJ. Easy. So, okay, I want to get right into just overall. Mm-hmm. It's been 20 years.
It has.
So 20 years this summer, right? Or this,
September will be 20 years since the shooting.
Yes, and Tupac and Biggie, both. That time period, which is kind of got a resurgence right now with the whole NWA, and I think my think back of that hardcore rap scene coming up, late 80s, mid to mid 90s.
Right.
Why does it resonate still 20 years later, do you think?
I think because we're talking about the same issues now that we were talking about then. I heard somebody say, life moves in trends. Dresses, hems go up and down, and ties get fat, then they get wide.
Yes, that's true.
They go back and forth. We kind of run on cycles. And I think that over the last 5-6 years, with all of the violence that we've seen in the police state, and and a lot of the dissension, the Black Lives Matter campaign, it takes me back to that time, 88, 89, 90, when that feeling was the same. I mean, you take a song, NWA, F the Police. When you look at that, could that song be equally as relevant today if it was a startup song, if nobody had ever heard it before? Could it be? And I think it was. So I think that's partially the reason why we've kind of come full circle with society. We're almost back to that same spot again, where you'll see another voice, I believe, come out of it. That will really resonate, like Pac and Biggie did, NWA, all that was a time that just spoke volumes about where we were as a society.
You're absolutely correct. I completely agree with that, because I was thinking about Public Enemy too, Fight the Power.
Absolutely.
901 is a Joke. All these songs that were just completely, they could be used today. You're right. They could be used today.
Absolutely.
Like, how did we get here? It's kind of crazy.
Yep.
Now we're gonna get into some real nitty gritty in here, but just overall, why Tupac for you? Because you've done documentaries, and you wrote the book, you co-wrote the book, and also, what is it about Tupac for you?
Well, I got involved with Tupac originally, and by extension with Biggie, because of my close friendship with a fellow by the name of Frank Alexander.
Okay.
And Frank was Tupac's bodyguard the night that Pac was shot. And I met Frank within maybe 2 months after that had happened.
Okay.
And we'd been friends. Frank was godfather to my son.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That was the kind of close relationship that we had. And I watched the effect that all had on him. And I watched the value that he gave his relationship with Pac, the value that he gave his... it wasn't a failure because nobody could have predicted what was going to happen, from his world, but how he felt that he failed his friend. And I watched how that had a personal effect on the man for close to 17 years.
Wow.
And what some may say eventually he took his life, and it stops to make you wonder. But my involvement with Pac kind of came along with my involvement with Frank.
Got it.
Because Frank could
Okay.
never let it go. And when we did Before I Wake, when that came out, Frank had said a lot about his relationship with Pac, and that spoke volumes to me. So as my relationship with Frank continued to progress, and through that, by extension, I met Russ Poole, and I became close friends with Russ, and my friendship with Russ, organically, it just seemed to be the Bermuda Triangle of information.
Funny. Yeah.
So if there was something to know about Pac, just by saturation, osmosis, really, I learned who he was, what he did, how he lived, and over the past at least 10 years now, have surrounded myself with the people that were the closest to Pac. Atron Gregory, who was Tupac's manager for his earliest years through Digital Underground, all that.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
He's
Yes.
a close personal friend of mine. We talk all the time on the phone. He's over at my house constantly over the holidays. When you have friends like that, whose next relationship, you're just one person removed.
You're just 1 degree
from the man.
Right.
So as we became more interested in the man and his life, you become more interested in what happened.
To his death, yeah.
Yeah, and I can't help the bloodhound scent in me. I come from a family of cops.
Oh, there you
I
go.
chose not to be one.
Oh, I didn't see that. I know that part. Okay,
Yeah.
how funny. Okay, yeah.
So the kind of the investigative side, the investigative nature of my personality
Is there.
the puzzle solver.
Yeah, makes
That's what
sense.
it is.
Yeah.
So it really lent itself to that, and it's interesting how time has had an erosion on the solidity of the story in terms of alibis and standby stories and that.
Yeah.
Time has a way of eroding it, because as people get further away from the incident, they tend to be more free to talk. If you feel like maybe you finally made it, you made that mile where statute of limitations or whatever, you tend to say a little bit more, and you let a little more slide. And
that's true. That'd be looser lips start to happen. Yes.
Russ Poole said that he really believed that the case would finally get turned on a deathbed confession. That's what he said. He said it would take something big like that to really, somebody just didn't care anymore.
Yeah.
And would put it out there because they wanted to rid themselves of the information, but there was no consequence to it. So.
When I think back at Tupac, because especially I loved Tupac and Biggie. I like their music and stuff, but with Tupac especially, I started doing research on him, how well read he was, how he had mentors of different races,
He did.
and stuff, and it was one of those cases. It felt like for me, what I came across from watching one of your documentaries and things that. It was real life REEL and real life REAL that came together somehow for him.
It did.
And was kind of his downfall.
Tupac was I just got done cutting a documentary for Atron. It was called Tupac: The Early Years.
Okay.
And we go all the way back to the very beginning.
Yeah.
We go back to Athena and everything, kind of our own biopic, for lack of a better term.
Okay.
And it really gave me a lot of insight as to how he ended up by watching the evolution there, and what it became. And you're right, the move to death row after he got out of prison, the Hollywood factor, being an actor, and watching how he embraced that. Tupac always wanted to be the best that he could be at whatever it is he did. Charles Fuller, Man, who was his buddy, said that Pac every morning would get up and he'd read the paper, and he'd be reading Billboard.
Yeah, he's totally well read. I mean,
he'd be reading Billboard magazine, and Man would say, "What are you reading Billboard for?" And he says, "Well, I want to know who's number one." He said, "What do you care?" He said, "Because I want to do whatever they're doing, I'm going to do, because if that's what got them there, that's what I'll do."
Yeah.
And so he was classically read, poetry.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what made him, I think, so prolific. Just right.
Oh my God, I know.
So,
But it just made me feel sad, because he was full of promise. Like, if he hadn't maybe not went that direction all the way, he could be like Snoop Dogg today, who got out of it, so to speak, and Ice-T, who kind of matured out of it, so to speak, and have careers in film and TV, and he could be one of those too.
I think there's a lot of people that believe that. I wonder secretly if everybody has a manifest destiny. And had Tupac actually not decided to go with death row or decided to go the route that he went, his other alternative at the time was to become the leader of the new African Panthers.
Oh, okay, yes,
Now,
okay, yeah.
So if you put yourself up as that, in that kind of a position where you get up to the heights of a Mutulu Shakur, or you get into the upper echelon of the political movement, the Panthers or whoever,
Yeah.
you're still setting yourself up pretty high.
That's true. No, that's true.
So,
Yeah, that's true.
So it makes me wonder, if you've got that kind of drive and that kind of ambition, you're such a bright flame, would you burn out regardless of what path you take?
That's true.
So I think that Tupac was a horrible tragedy. I think that Biggie was a bigger tragedy than Pac, because there was no reason.
Yeah, for him.
There was no reason for him to die other than just to cover up a lie.
Yeah.
And 187 is one of the few places I've seen that try to actually give a reason for why Biggie was killed.
Yeah.
And Pac was Pac. Pac shot cops.
Yeah,
there was no sense that he wasn't on some people's radar.
Oh, he was completely,
no doubt about that.
Completely.
But Biggie wasn't like that. He had a completely different kind of personality. And so while some might say Pac was the whip waiting to crack, Biggie wasn't like that. So when I look at the tragedies, they're both huge tragedies.
And they're forever connected too, of course, because they happen so within each other.
Yeah, absolutely, within months.
God, I remember it. I totally remember the time and stuff. So it's kind of crazy. Okay, so let's dig a little deeper. But one of the things I want to ask you is, when you started doing your investigative stuff, and I asked this with Esley Savage, who did Straight Outta Compton, did you have any fears for your person, your life, anything going when you were going to dig in? I mean, I think it's a natural question to ask, right? I mean, did you have any?
Sure. I think that sometimes people's curiosity and their drive to seek the truth, it becomes the anesthetic that dulls the fear.
Okay.
You're so driven to try to find it, you're not necessarily looking in your rearview mirror to see who's behind you. Okay.
Now, I like that. Okay.
Having said that, at the time I was doing Assassination, I was living in Kentucky. So I was not in the hood per se. I was in, rolling green hills with the split rail fences and,
Drinking
2,500 miles away from the action.
Right.
And to this day, I still don't drive down to places that, where you might put yourself in harm's way.
Yes.
So I do say that. Now, I think more recently, with the release of 187, I think that the closer that you get to the nerve, the more it could hurt. And I truly believe that. When we were doing the first assassination, there was a little bit of naivety because I was early in the investigation.
Yeah.
I was pointed in a certain direction.
So they're like, yeah, he's okay. Like,
you're not much of a threat.
No.
If you're out bouncing around over here, and you're just considered to be the loony.
Yes, right. Yes,
that's the thing.
Right,
I mean, the village idiot, they let him run around. But when you become focused, and what sounds like this kind of cloudy myth starts to take shape and really gel, that's when you get people like Reggie Wright getting on the internet saying that R.J. Bond's the next one to die right after Russ Poole.
I looked that up. I kind of saw some of that stuff.
Yeah,
yes.
And so you look at it and you say, well, okay, you got to you get close to the mark to get them all riled up like that, right?
Right.
Personally, I feel bad. I think once a year, right around that time, that's got to be Reggie's least favorite time of the year, because as that date rolls around, you're like, here comes the noise again.
Oh, yeah.
And then it goes away.
Oh, okay.
And it does. It tends to be kind of seasonal, where, people, it's interesting at the moment.
Yeah.
And then public attention kind of goes to the next shiny metal object.
Yeah.
But, I can imagine that as you gear up towards that season, there's okay, I'm just going to stay inside a little bit more.
Why are you thinking about the 20th anniversary? Were you thinking anything's going to pipe down for the 20th anniversary? I'm sure we're going to have probably...
we have the biopic coming out. That's on the fast track. They're shooting that in Atlanta right now.
Okay.
So whatever talk, and I think they're spending $35 million on this movie.
Oh, wow.
And the advertising and marketing budget alone is going to be maybe a third of that, maybe $10 million.
Yeah.
So you're looking at a huge amount of money being spent to put it out in the public. So the name Tupac and the Tupac story is going to be big for a very long time in that summer time frame next summer.
Yeah.
On the 20th anniversary.
Yeah.
And along with that, is going to be these nagging questions, and we live in a different age than we lived in 20 years ago.
Yes.
We've got the media, the internet, all of these things. You've got, TMZ.
Yeah.
Half the stuff that people used to get away with back in the 90s,
Yes.
those shenanigans don't happen anymore.
I
Ask Suge
remember
about that.
Yes,
Yeah.
I remember that.
That's right. You ask
Pre-internet.
Suge. Yeah.
Yes, like
Suge
that.
will tell you, people follow you around everywhere.
Yeah.
And the TMZs and that. They always got the scoop on it. So,
They do.
As a different world, I think that now some bigger questions are going to be asked around that 20th anniversary because you're waking the public back up again.
Yeah. So those folks out there who may not know or do know, it's the 20th anniversary of the deaths of Tupac and Christopher Wallace, who is Biggie Smalls, or Notorious B.I.G. And both, if I'm correct, both murders have still unsolved. Completely still
Absolutely
unsolved. So that's what we're talking about, and you've been doing some research and trying to dig in. And so, who are some of the major players that are in Tupac's story or in this story period that you're talking about?
Well,
Let's start there.
sure. Originally, when we did the first assassination movies 10 years ago, we had pieced together the events that had happened
Okay.
pretty accurate chronologically in terms of a timeline of events, and that's
Okay.
the first thing you have to do when you're
Makes
deconstructing
sense.
anything. Try to figure out who was where at the time.
Okay.
And from there, we headed in a certain direction where we were able to point a hard line in relationships between some of the key players. We'll talk about in a second.
Okay.
As we did the second assassination movie and then working into 187, we started to turn a corner a little bit on the investigation of where we had looked, because we had always drawn a dotted line to Suge Knight.
Which I think everybody
in the
knows, yeah.
assassination. Sure.
Yeah. Naturally, I think.
Yeah. And we drew that, but when I interviewed Brent Becker, who was from Las Vegas Metro Police Department, who was one of the lead investigators
Okay.
during the Tupac shooting and throughout the case, he made a very interesting comment. He said that a CEO of a major corporation would be shot at in Nevada. That would take a major investigation. If
Okay.
it was Bill Gates, somebody tried to shoot Bill Gates while he was at the Mirage,
Yes.
that's going to draw major attention.
Yes.
And he always felt like, in our conversations, Becker always felt like the shooting and the death of Tupac Shakur still took away some of the heat and the steam, but you realize that somebody was still shooting at Suge Knight too. One of the most powerful men in rap.
Yes.
The most powerful man. He had unlimited sources of money that he could do whatever he wanted to do at that time. And you're going to not only shoot at Tupac, that's one thing, but you want to shoot at Suge Knight, the man who's got the power and the money and the connections. That's a suicide mission.
Yeah.
It really is.
I agree. Yeah.
So I think that we had looked at that and that, but as the more research came in, the more people that we talked to, the more interviews that we did, we watched the investigation kind of turn the corner and look more at that maybe for once Tupac wasn't the target. Maybe Suge was actually the target, and maybe Tupac was, we won't say collateral damage, but he and Christopher Wallace may not have been, they may have been sacrificial lambs for a broader activity.
Wow. And so when you say that, it brings a bigger question. Why has Suge Knight been taken down? Yeah, I mean, there's been other things that have happened to him since, but he's like still kicking.
With all due respect for Suge, yeah, he's the Teflon man. He's been shot so many times, shot at so many times.
Yes.
This foolishness that happened with the truck and grabbing the camera from the reporter. He's certainly not helped himself at all.
No, not at all.
But he's a character. But I think that what's ultimately saved Suge is what he knows.
Okay.
You got to remember something. You're from the Compton.
Yeah, South Central. Yes.
Yeah, South Central area.
Yeah.
When you get to a certain point in your life and you know a certain amount of people and you grow up with these people, you kind of know where the bodies are buried.
Yeah.
And most of the time that's in a metaphorical sense. And this time, so I think that you tend to be looked at two different ways, especially when you have a lot of money, you have a lot of influence in the area, like Suge Knight had, David Kenner, and some of these other people there.
Right.
At that time, you know a lot more, not just about your business, but about other people's business. Drug dealers really don't care, just between you and me and everybody listening.
Everybody watching,
everybody
listening.
Else on the planet. Drug dealers don't make any pretense about what they do.
They don't. Sure
So
don't.
if
They
you
don't.
say you're a drug dealer, they okay, and
Yeah, right.
they do that. People that are, crooks or criminals or in a mob or whatever, I mean, they really don't make a lot. They don't try to hide what they are.
that's true.
They're, in one sense, they're the purest form of honesty.
Yeah, I
Take it
agree.
or leave it.
Yeah.
This is the
Right.
person I am, and
Right.
until somebody catches me, put me in jail, that's what I'm going to do.
Right.
So what you have to do is you have to turn the scope and you have to look at the people that may not want. That may be telling you something that they may not want something else to be revealed about.
Okay.
And I think that Suge Knight knows a lot about that.
Sure.
And I think he knows a lot about the inner workings of things.
Okay.
And when we wrote the book 187, we went as far as to say that there was just some people that wanted him out of the way.
Wow.
Okay.
See.
And yeah.
They were going to do what they could to get him out of the way.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
business was going to go on, and
Right.
and the book makes it very clear that since the beginning of this whole thing, it was either going to be Suge Knight is dead or Suge Knight is so far and put away in prison that nobody's going to believe him anyway.
You have a good point. The business is going to go on. That was the West. That was the through line. Probably this whole thing is that business had to continue as. I mean, just get him out the way or
Yes.
get whoever out the way.
That's right, and there was enough of a machine that was already in place that when he started putting himself on the cover of Vibe magazine, when he started putting himself out there,
yeah.
his affiliation with the Bloods,
remember that,
drawing.
yeah.
He started drawing a harsh spotlight on.
He did.
On a lot of people who really just didn't want to have a spotlight put on them because it was getting in the way of business.
Yes.
So I think that it's more than plausible to believe that when you have a certain amount of knowledge, people might want to put you away because of it,
Yeah.
to silence you, but the other half are scared because of what you might, in any particular situation, choose to reveal.
Yeah. That makes sense. That totally makes sense.
Because Suge Knight was about leverage. When you look at the whole thing with Tupac and all that, everything Suge Knight did business-wise was all about leverage. I had something on you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, when you look at people that
Yeah.
do business, when they know how he does business, they think, well, could he do that to us, and what would that cost?
Yes.
What would that look like?
Right.
So that's how that rolls.
Wow. And so when you made the through line, you made the connections. Okay, we have the timeline of what happened. Then you started to do your investigation. What are some of the things that you were starting to find?
The first thing I found was how many people hadn't talked to the police.
Okay.
I was stunned.
Wow.
And actually, to tell you the truth, assassination wasn't assassination when it first started.
Okay.
It was actually going to be about how the music industry had changed since Pac had died.
Okay.
So it had a completely different focus. But as we started to interview more and more people that knew Pac, were around at the time, and were actually eyewitnesses to what happened that night in Vegas, they kept coming up over and over again. Have you been interviewed by the police? Nope. Have the police talk to you? Nope.
Isn't it weird? Like, I mean, you're in Vegas where there's thousands of people all the time, outside, everywhere, on Las Vegas Boulevard.
Yep.
And no one had. There's no information at all about anything.
Right. No one saw anything.
Yeah.
That's
weird.
So that was the biggest revelation that we had was how many people hadn't talked to the police.
Wow.
And you think to yourself, well, wait a minute, how thorough of an investigation can you really do if you're not talking to anybody?
Right.
Why not?
Right.
Michael Moore, who was one of
Yes.
Pac's bodyguards, had never talked to the police. And he had so much to say about the details of what went down that night. To me, it's just a question of why not. Normally when you do an investigation, you ask everybody because you don't know. I mean, the guy that's standing on the street corner
Could see something.
The sterno bum sitting on the corner.
Yeah.
You may not be able to put him up on a stand, but he may provide you with a single piece of information that turns the whole case to where you can take it in a direction that it would go, and then use that to talk to other people.
So why weren't they talking? Why weren't the police talking to them? What did you find? Like, what are some things you found?
It was largely just disinterest.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was largely just disinterest.
Because he's a gangster rap. I mean, like, what was it?
There was a theory that existed with us, or a belief, I should say, that existed with us for almost 10 years, that the Vegas police just didn't want to cause the stir of a rapper, and they didn't want the rap community in Vegas. They didn't want the whole the movement in there. They just didn't want another high-profile kind of OJ case. They'd seen what OJ had done in L.A.
Okay.
Don't forget, you got to put this in perspective.
Yeah,
you know, OJ was being tried.
Yeah.
OJ was being tried. That was such a zoo and such a circus, media circus, and the cops, Mark Furman, they were all coming under fire, you know, by the defense. Right, wrong, or indifferent, a lot of people think Vegas just didn't want to deal with that. So they said, you know, it's better just to put it up on the shelf. Russ Poole had told me directly that when he talked to Vegas police, they took him and showed Russ all of the murder books, and there was 22 or 25 murder books lined a whole shelf. Wow. Russ said, I'd really love to look at those murder books. And Vegas police said, you're not going to look at them.
Oh, my God.
You're not going to look at them, and nobody's going to look at them, and that's it. And so for the longest time, we thought it was just kind of grave indifference. By the Vegas Police Department. More recently, in the last few months, we've come across some information. We're still checking it out, but it may color that indifference into something a little bit deeper. So stay tuned.
Okay, stay tuned, folks, for that.
We'll have a follow-up.
I mean, that's so interesting because you're right. Yeah, something happens. You talk to everyone in the area to get what's going on, who was there, but this didn't happen.
Right.
So what's the next thing you found out? You have that already going on, so what's the next thing?
Well, when we talk to people, it's amazing what you talk to. When you talk to people and actually find information out, you find out things like what happened with Michael Moore, what happened that night with the confusion regarding the radio that Frank Alexander didn't have, and the instruction by Reggie Wright and the Right-Way people at an attorney's office on a Saturday to not carry their weapons. Death Row Dave, who was Suge Knight's driver, and he said that actually there were two meetings in Vegas that day. One with the Right-Way security staff who were told not to carry any weapons, and then there was another meeting that took place with the Las Vegas off-duty cops and some other cops from the area that were providing the security at Club 662, and they were also instructed not to carry any weapons. So there's some controversy there. We started to dig into that. What was that all about? What was about the radios? Why was there not? And then of course there was Michael Moore's bombshell that he heard over Reggie Wright's radio. Got him.
Interesting.
Well, now we have a case. Now we have something to work with. So we started just. You kind of just draw down on a piece of paper, and they're almost like swim lanes in a pool. You work each swim lane individually. You work each part of it individually and see where it goes. So we said, well, if they haven't talked to Michael Moore, who else haven't they talked to? So then we started looking for people that had not been talked to, looking for people that were close to the situation. And then from there, we then expanded it to other witnesses. Witnesses aren't just people that eyeball witness something. A witness can be somebody who knew of a predicate event, something that happened prior to the actual event itself. So, for example, Lena Sunday, who was a jazz artist and a very good personal friend of Tupac, had a conversation with Tupac on the telephone right before he went to Vegas, and was talking about Suge was going to be okay with the fact that he was going to leave the record label. They were working it out, and that was why he wanted to go to Vegas. And she said, don't. Just stay at home, watch the fight like the rest of us do on TV, right? So these are people that had pieces of information, conversations with Pac right before. It puts you in his frame of mind, what he was doing at the time, and then also gives you a picture of the events that would cause motive.
Because Pac wanted to leave Death Row.
Yeah, I believe that to be true.
I've heard that, so I want to make sure people who at home, if you don't remember, not sure, that he was that was his plan, and so of course the leaving Suge Knight is not easy, I'm sure. Well,
according to Michael Moore, there was a confrontation between Suge and Tupac in New York at the MTV Awards.
Oh, okay, yes, I've heard.
Where they were talking about Death Row East, and they had that kind of thing going on there. But earlier in that day, before the awards show, there was a confrontation between Suge and Tupac because Tupac had heard an interview done with Snoop.
Snoop, yeah.
And Snoop had said, "Hey, I have no problem with anybody from the East Coast. I can record with whomever I want to record with. There's no personal beef here." And Pac got mad. He spun the limo around, and he went back to the hotel looking for Snoop. He wanted to have a one-on-one with him about that. And he didn't find Snoop, but he found Suge instead. And from what I've learned about Pac, and 10 different people have testified to this, Pac will just unload on whomever he wanted to unload on.
Okay.
It didn't matter. If you were in the line of fire, you got yelled at. Shock G just said it. He said, you got screamed at. He said, it didn't matter. If you knew Tupac, you got screamed at one point or another. So, and it was just part of just knowing the personality of who he was.
Okay.
So he gets back to this hotel, and by the way, that's what also makes the story of Michael Morris much more credible. He's a bodyguard that was there at the time, and he witnessed the confrontation between the two of them.
Okay.
And Suge asked Michael Moore to stay inside the hotel room while they had this confrontation. And that was really unusual because at death row, typical business was if you were not the parties talking to each other, you stepped outside the room because there was conversations that you were not going to be privy to.
Right.
But Michael Moore believed that he was asked to stay inside the room because Mr. Knight was going to take Tupac's head off during that confrontation. It got that physical. It got that blow to blow. So we had this whole setup that happened on the 4th of September, 3 days before Tupac was shot.
Wow.
So you have this big confrontation. The flight home, Snoop did an interview on a radio show not more than a couple of years ago where he talked about the flight back from New York and how scared he was from Snoop, from Suge and from Tupac, that he had to cower down with a blanket over him and a plastic fork and a knife that he was trying to protect himself with. That must have been a long plane ride home.
I'm sure. He was probably like 4.5 hours, 5 hours in New York came from LA, from Las Vegas, about 4 hours. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, and what's funny is, again, going back to what I said about people, talking a little bit more now about things that happened then than they had in the past 20 years.
Yeah.
You get this whole big story about Snoop that fills in the gap between that confrontation and then the events that happened in Las Vegas. And suddenly Michael Moore, who was originally kind of said, well, do we know, do we really know this guy's telling the truth? What do we know? Well, the guy had no reason to lie to begin with, but even if he did, his story becomes much more credible when it's enhanced by the events with Snoop.
Makes sense.
When Snoop talked about that. So we know that in New York they had this confrontation.
Yeah.
And they were going to go back. And then, of course, there are many witnesses who said that Tupac really didn't want to go to Vegas. That was the big thing. He didn't want to go. He according to Glow, his aunt, and a lot of other people, he made some excuse up about wanting to go see his cousin Kenny for stealing a rifle in Atlanta. But at the end of the day, he was happy. He was actually in a relationship at the time with Quidada Jones. He was happy. He had his house in Calabasas that he thought he owned, but he didn't. But he had his house, and he wanted to play house. He wanted to stay home and actually kind of do what normal people do. That was a part of Pac's life that Pac had never had. That stability. That sense of, I can hang my hat and know that it's going to be there the next morning. I mean, Tupac came home one day back in Marin City and came home to an empty apartment. His mom had moved everything out and disappeared and left him with an empty apartment.
Wow.
I mean, you imagine the impact that has on your personality. So at the end of the day, Tupac had this confrontation, and this was what all set the stage for what was happening in Las Vegas. So these are the interviews that we did to start collecting and building the story.
Got it.
And of course, with the story comes motive.
So now we're on to now. So now let's move on to that. So now we're on to motive. What were you finding then? What did you start to find?
Well,
take a drink. This is real.
If it was true, that Pac was going to leave the record label, and most people are in agreement that some degree or another he was going to. It was either going to be he was going to get out of the music business entirely and focus on acting.
I heard that.
And he was going to be a producer for other people like the Outlaws and things like that through Machiavelli Records, which was a label. He was either going to leave Death Row and establish a relationship directly with Interscope, because remember, Interscope was the parent, Death Row was the child.
Yes, exactly.
And for Machiavelli Records to be a child of the child, that didn't make a lot of economic sense, because why would you just give somebody a piece of what you're doing if you're going to go do the same thing they are? Not to be a competitor, but at the same time to coexist with under the Interscope label.
Makes sense.
So there's a couple of varieties of that story that I've heard, and all the way up to and including that he was just going to literally start his own record label, and that was the end of it, and he wanted nothing to do with Death Row.
Got it.
And the conversation with Michael Moore, whether or not Pac was heated or not, that's what he said.
Okay.
He said, you can have Machiavelli, I just want the hell out of here. I'm done.
Got it.
So that was kind of
that was kind of there. That's out there.
Yeah,
They weren't
so
leaving.
there was motive on the part, maybe Suge was mad about losing
Right.
an artist. Maybe he was mad about the money he was going to lose for losing the artist. Maybe he was just personally insulted.
I'll say that too, yeah.
And that's why the public really puts a hard hand on Suge, because he's the guy with the closest motive.
Mm-hmm.
If it's something more vague than that, and of course, the Orlando Anderson beating theory.
Right.
There's a guy that's got motive, but it's a different kind of motive.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have as fierce a motive as somebody that wants to kill you.
Yeah, true.
You know what I mean?
True.
So that's why me and a lot of other people, we still put that dotted line. We could never put a solid line to
Okay.
it, and that always bothered me, because you
Yeah.
had to ask that question. If he was the one who was responsible for it all, would he put himself in the same car as Tupac and get shot at?
That's true. Okay. Wow. Okay.
And that was the number one critique when we put Assassination out.
Yeah.
That was the number one critique that everybody had with the
Makes
movie.
sense.
Is they said, this is the big unanswered question.
Right.
Why would you do it? Now, since that time, Suge Knight has shot himself in the leg on purpose at a nightclub.
Yeah.
Okay, for insurance or for whatever
Yeah.
reason he did it.
Yeah.
So if you're willing to take a gun and shoot yourself
yourself.
for whatever reason, having somebody else shoot at you with reasonable expectation that they may not hit you,
Right.
it doesn't seem so crazy anymore.
So all the investigations you've done, I mean, so as of today, you still don't have a solid line to Suge.
No, and in fact, that's what I said. That's when we did
Yeah.
187, the investigation actually turned. We broke that line because I no longer believe that Suge Knight was responsible for it. Now people say, well, RJ, you went back, you said this. Now, well,
Was it over time, over years?
Every investigation, right?
changes sometimes.
We put out the facts and we put out what we know
At the time.
at the time,
Right.
And we ask people to be the judge. You'll never hear me say RJ says this, so you must believe it
Right.
because I know everything.
Right.
I don't claim to have that kind of degree or pedigree, or
Yeah,
I wasn't the big investigator that figured everything out, so you got to
Right.
believe me. Blah blah blah.
Right.
That's not the way I roll. But when you look at, we put it out, you be the judge. It's actually on the DVD itself. You be the judge.
Yeah, it is on DVD.
Here's the information. You want to think Suge did it? Okay.
Yeah.
You want to think he didn't do it? Oh, that's okay too.
Right.
So it allowed us this window. We didn't paint ourselves into any corners that way. So that as we found out when I was working with Russ, God rest in peace now, but when I was working with Russ was willing to go apologize to Suge Knight because he actually also no longer believed after we gave him even more evidence.
Wow.
That Suge was not personally responsible, and in fact was definitely a victim, and may have been the primary victim, the primary target, where certainly somebody wanted to take out Tupac for reasons that may have been there, but was Tupac shot at was collateral damage when somebody was going after Suge. That you
Which
certainly
has happened before. Obviously, it's like that's not people have.
There are a lot of people want to take out Suge.
Yeah.
So when you look at how he was in the middle of all of these legal dramas and all things like that, and One Oak Club, he's just sitting in a nightclub, and people come back in the back door blasting. First thing they say is, "You shot Tupac!" Bang, bang, bang. That's what the witnesses heard.
Yeah.
And he got shot. He almost died from it. And you figure, why now?
Yeah.
Why would somebody now want to just go run up and shoot Suge Knight? I mean, there's no reward, dead or alive, for Suge Knight that I'm aware of anyway.
Yeah, well.
So you have to keep asking yourself, why? Why did it still continue?
Yeah.
What is it about this guy that so many people want to see him in prison, want to see him in jail?
Yeah.
Again, no friend to himself. I'm not saying the guy was clean. I'm not saying he's the model citizen.
Right.
Compton's number one model citizen.
Right.
But at the same time, there were a lot of things that he was around and involved with that were bigger than he was.
That makes sense. I can see that.
And-
I can try that. That makes sense to me. I can see that. Actually, have you heard anything from Suge Knight through this whole time period? Is he saying to you?
Yeah, absolutely. He didn't say it to me directly.
Okay.
He said it to Michael Carlin, who's my co-writer in the book.
Michael.
And he said it to Russ as well. We were in contact with Suge's attorneys.
Okay.
Because remember, Suge's in prison now, and he's in jail. I shouldn't say he's in prison.
He's in jail. Right now he's in jail. Right,
he's in jail with what they call a no contact order, which means that other than his attorneys, he's not allowed to talk to a soul.
Oh, really?
Nope.
So you can't go in.
He can't talk to anybody, and it reminds me of kind of like the prisoner of Zenda, where he is completely isolated. He hasn't been convicted of anything.
No, yeah, I know he hasn't.
He's still waiting trial.
Right.
Yet they give him a no contact order. Literally put this guy in.
How can he do that?
Well, you tell me.
Yeah.
Where they put this guy in basically solitary confinement, where the only people he can talk to is attorneys. So what we did was Michael and Russ wrote a very, very short version of 187, because we sent the book to Suge's attorneys and said, you should probably read this.
Okay.
Because there may be more to this story than meets the eye.
Got it.
And we sent it to them. They go, we're going to read this whole book. This is 300 pages. We're going to read this book. So Michael and Russ came back with it was maybe about 20-page version of the book, where we just bullet pointed everything like that. And according to Suge's attorneys, and now again, I didn't hear this firsthand, but I have no reason to. Michael's my partner. I mean, you tell Michael something, you tell me something.
Right.
When they told the Suge Knight's attorney, Culpepper, I think was his name.
Okay.
Thaddeus Culpepper said that when they read this document, the breakdown of the book to Suge's first response was, "Who the f are these guys?"
That makes sense. Okay.
And the second response was, "How do they know all of this?"
Ooh.
Okay. Was, and we got that from the horse's mouth. That's in an email and verified twice that came from Suge's attorneys.
Okay.
So we know that he is aware of it. He knows we're aware of the book, and he knows that there's somebody out stumping for him. Back in December, a year ago December, Suge went on TMZ and he said something very interesting when they caught him. It was right before the book dropped. It was during all that time when there was a little pre-release for the book and all that at the time. Suge Knight made a very interesting comment. You go back and you watch the TMZ about it when they caught him, and he said that Tupac fans, if you're real Tupac fans, you need to be on the watch. You need to be on the lookout, because and alluding to the fact that things aren't what they seem.
Okay.
And for a guy who's been on record as saying Tupac's alive, and he's been saying that, for him to turn around and allude to the fact that that they need to pay attention, that Tupac fans really need to pay attention, that said a lot. So I really think that he ain't going to be throwing rainbows or roses at us or anything, but at the same time, I think finally somebody understands the bigger picture.
What'd you think of the hologram a few years ago?
The Tupac hologram? Yeah. Oh, I loved it. I loved it. There was an actor by the name of Josh Harway who actually did some of the work. We just recently re-released the assassination movies. And we added a whole bunch of new footage in it, too.
Everybody, there you go.
So there's a good reason to spend the $5. I think it's $5 or $6. Walmart.com or somewhere you can get it. Yeah. But we released a bunch, and we actually have some reenactments in there now. With Frank, when Frank was alive. He went and put on his old death row outfit. And he still fit into it, which surprised the hell out of me, because I couldn't remember 20 years ago, you'd never get me in anything I fit in. Me neither.
Right? Yeah, that's true.
So Frank put his thing in, and we had Josh Harway, who was a Tupac impersonator, come in and do the reenactments with him. So it's really cool. We actually went to Vegas, went into the MGM. I stuck my camcorder in there, and we took some surveillance type footage. And it was a lot of fun to do. Yeah. But the big thing there, Josh Harway was actually the body model for the hologram. When Dre was putting together the whole hologram production, they used Josh for that. So a little inside track.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's fun. Yeah, I was just kind of when I was doing it, I was like, I wonder what he thinks about the hologram. I was just kind of, because there is those theories that because you've done.
It was dope. I loved it. Yeah.
Because I've heard all the theories that Tupac's still alive on an island somewhere making new music. Yeah. But obviously, like you said, you've done the investigative stuff. He's dead. I mean, he's dead.
Well, I think he's deader than Julius Caesar. Okay, that's that. I think and the biggest evidence is that his whole family put it out there the best. Yeah. They said Pac, when he was alive, could never shut his mouth, and that's what got him into trouble. And if there was no way for 20 years
he'd be silent,
that he would ever be able to keep quiet for this long.
That's so funny.
So so that, to me, when his own family puts that out there, you tend to believe it.
Now some of his family. I read some of his family actually came to the Atlanta premiere of the second Tupac Assassination movie.
Yeah, well, we did Tupac Assassination II, which is called The Reckoning. Yeah, it was a direct-to-DVD. It didn't get any kind of theater play or any kind of big splash like the first one did. First one was kind of that. Tupac Reckoning was more of a follow-up, but it was a much more intimate movie, because we actually got in to talk to some people who had seen Assassination, and they said, you know what, we have something to say about this too. Okay. And that included his family.
Okay.
And yeah, Glow Cox, who was Tupac's aunt,
Yeah.
And pretty much raised him when Athena wasn't around.
Yeah.
And Qatari, one of the outlaws, a couple of the outlaws came to, and true story, we were in Atlanta actually shooting part of Reckoning. We shot Tupac Assassination Reckoning at the Tupac Shakur Performance Arts Center.
Okay.
The Tupac Shakur in Stone Mountain, Georgia.
Yeah.
At the foundation. And they gave us permission to shoot on the grounds there in the prayer gardens and all that there. So it was really nice. But while we were there, true story, we're out in the parking lot and we got a photographer and we're taking some pictures out in front of the foundation. And out of nowhere, this car comes barreling up and crashes over the curb so that the front of the car springs up, bounces down in this pavement. Frank and I look at us, okay, we're done. Somebody's coming to hit us. We're done.
Yeah.
And this car comes to a screeching halt. And Edie, Amin, and the other outlaws all jump out of the car and come running over to Frank. They go, Big Frank, Big Frank.
Oh, funny.
And you got to realize that, and this was 2009. Yeah, 2008, 2009 era right there. They hadn't seen Frank, the outlaws hadn't seen Frank in 12 years.
Wow.
And when they'd seen Frank, they were only teenagers. They were 16, 17 years old, and they were in the car with Frank of the night of the shooting.
Yeah.
And we have some wonderful pictures from that. And you know what? And if we interact with people and stuff like that, maybe get some pictures to show you.
Yeah, please.
But the Outlaws, that was the first time that they had ever been able to get back together again with Frank after 12 years to talk about what happened that night.
Yeah.
It was a very interesting discussion because they were remembering what they knew and what they had seen, and Frank talked a little bit more because they were kids.
They were kids,
You know, and so they remember a little less than Frank did, and Frank had been reliving it for years anyway.
I'm sure,
but it was so amazing to see the outpouring of love that we had in Atlanta. We were the Atlanta Film Festival. We took red carpet premiere award for that.
Yes, and also you won the Spaghetti Junction Film Award that year too.
Junction Film Festival. Yep, that was a lot of fun, and that was the one where the family came. And sat in for Reckoning.
Good.
And you know, Glow was in Reckoning. She did an interview, and she rarely interviews with anybody.
Okay.
But it was that was a big get for us.
Yeah.
But she told it as it was, laid it on the line. And
Has Athena say anything to you?
Well, my Athena story, I think everybody's got one.
Okay, I'm sure you always hear
Athena
things,
story,
right?
Big or small, you know, it all means something.
Yeah.
Athena had been pretty hands-off. She knew of everything that was going on with the movies, and in fact, I flew to New York to vet Assassination with her attorneys to make sure that they had no objection with anything we had in the movie. You know, we were just making sure, and that was Frank's relationship with Athena because Frank knew Athena very well, and he would never do anything to try to cross her or do anything contrary to her interest. Okay. So I got my backpack on and flew to New York and met with Donald David, who was the attorney for the estate. We sat, had Chinese food, and vetted the movie in his office. Yeah. And much later, fast forward a little bit to Assassination II, she'd always known what was going on.
Okay.
And when right after Assassination II broke, I think it was that next summer of 2009, I had a poster from Assassination. We did these, those big posters, 24-inch, giant movie posters. They're two-sided. Well, I had one of them. We had a bunch of them, but I kept one of them, and I started getting people to sign my poster. Everybody that was in Tupac's life, or that we interviewed, I'd have them sign my poster.
Okay.
And so it's just a silver marker. I mean, the poster's littered with signatures now, and it's framed and hanging in my office. But at the time, I knew there was going to have the Tupac birthday party.
Okay.
It was the first Tupac Shakur birthday party at the foundation.
Okay.
And everybody's going to be there, and the Outlaws were performing and all that. So I took a couple of boxes of DVDs down to the foundation. I kept giving them DVDs because they'd sell them at the gift shop. Okay. And they keep all the money from them. They were just giving them out for them. And I brought the DVDs down, and I told them I'll be there for the show. And so we had a great time. It was wonderful. But Athena was there.
Okay.
And Glow introduced me to Athena. This is R.J. Bond. He's the one who did the assassination movies. And Athena started to cry.
Oh.
And she gave me a big hug. Just a welcome, warm hug. And, and I hear that she does this a lot with people that were close to Pac because, they care about his legacy. Okay. That means a lot to her. His legacy means a lot to her. So she gave me just the most warm, heartfelt hug. And it was at that moment I realized, whether or not we're exactly spot on or we're right, we care. Mm-hmm. We give a damn about it. and that's what meant something to her.
Got
So
it.
now take that forward. The next thing out of my mouth was, will you sign my poster?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay,
yes,
when you get down, let's get down
Yeah,
to
yes,
it, right?
yes,
I
yes.
got a Tupac Assassination. You know
Yes.
what the movie's about. You know where we're going with
Yeah.
it. It's controversial.
Yes.
You know, what side are you on? Say you.
Yes.
Will you sign my poster?
Yes.
And she did.
Okay.
It was
Okay, good.
with peace and love and respect.
Aw.
And that was it, Athena.
That's cool.
So, you know, and I proudly put it, you know, in my office still to
I'm
this
sure,
day.
I'm sure.
So I truly believe that the family would not have been involved as much as they were
Okay.
with Frank and with if they didn't feel like what we had to say was important.
So just on the Biggie side, did you talk to Faith Evans or Chris Ross's mother or anybody close to him, or was it more Tupac? You did more of that. Then?
Well, for a long time, I actually refused to do anything about Biggie.
Okay.
Because, and as I've come to learn recently, I was right. This becomes like a nine-headed serpent. You can
okay.
deal with one, and you can really specialize just in one.
Okay.
But when you let it bleed over into the other, there's this cast of characters. If you read 187, we start with a laundry
Yeah.
list of names. We
Yeah.
start with a whole shopping list of who's who.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it looks like a baseball player scorecard. You know, you got 25 names.
Yeah, yeah.
So the stories and then what happened with them and the motives, the players, you know, double, triple almost.
Yeah.
So for a long time, I said, no, we're not getting into the Biggie side of it. Let's just focus on the Tupac side because that's what we know the most about.
Yeah. Okay.
And we did that. Now, when I met Russ was primarily Biggie.
Okay.
He was the opposite of that. He was
Okay.
the Biggie guy, wasn't involved too much with the Tupac, knew enough about it to attach
Yeah.
it to what was going on with Biggie. But when I met him, shortly after Frank died, we kind of changed the focus and shifted the investigation. Now, okay, I felt like we kind of pinned this down. Now it's time we can move over here and really start
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
looking at this and drill just as hard with that as we did. That being said, we let Russ do most because he had done the original investigation and talked to all the players back in the day.
Yeah.
We used a lot of his previous notes
Okay.
and a lot of the files and recordings and things that he had from the key players. You know, and sadly, and this is kind of the way it tends to go when you're in the controversial business.
Yes.
People don't always like to talk about. I have great respect for Faith because she's putting out new material right
yeah.
now
Oh,
about you know, she didn't have an affair with Tupac. She really
I've
wants
heard
to
that,
get
yes.
some stuff out there about it, and I really appreciate that. That being said, we got involved with it right in the middle of the civil trial, the Wallace civil trial, when they
Okay.
were suing the city of Los
Yes,
Angeles.
I remember that.
We had a lot of conversation with Perry Sanders, the attorney for the Wallaces, and all of the attorneys there. So we were very involved with that side of it and understanding the information that was flowing in from an investigative standpoint. But I never, unfortunately, had the ability to directly go to Valletta Wallace. I didn't have that level of access,
okay.
partially because I had Frank.
Okay.
Frank was so well liked by the estate and by Athena.
I was going to ask you how that's perfect. So you-
Layla Steinberg and everybody
Okay.
else that I was able to talk to. That was how I interviewed them. Atron gave me the Digital Underground guys. I was able to interview them. I don't personally know anybody from the Biggie
Got it.
camp. I know a couple
Got
of
it.
bodyguards there, but they don't have that same kind of level of access. So
Okay.
it puts me in a position no different than anybody else on the street who
Okay.
would throw a rock at a wall and say, am I going to get an interview with this superstar Faith,
Yeah.
how am I going to get a hold of her?
Yeah.
You know, and then you get the gatekeeping with the, the agents and
Yeah.
the attorneys and
Yeah.
and so no, the unfortunate, and I am sad about that we didn't get a chance to really sit down and do that. Can't say we're not going to,
Right, at some point, right.
because we have Assassination 3 coming out.
Hey, there you go.
Okay, so but then that's going to wrap it up.
Yeah.
I
'Cause,
promise you that will wrap it up.
one of my fans actually asked me to ask you this, was like, it once and for all in your investigation, is there a connection between the Tupac and Biggie murders?
There absolutely is.
So it is. Okay.
There absolutely
That's one of the
is.
questions they asked me. They're
Yep,
like,
there,
let me ask you
there
this. Yeah.
absolutely is. And,
Okay.
and it's the next book we have coming out right now. The name of it is called The Big Lie. And it's based on the old Himmler philosophy. I think it was Himmler that said, if you tell a lie often enough and you repeat it often enough, no matter how small the lie is, people will believe a big lie versus a small lie. And if you repeat that enough, people will believe it is the truth.
Yeah.
And,
I've heard that.
Yeah, so and that's what it's about. And really, the reason Biggie was killed was to cover up the lie, or to basically, what's the word I'm looking for? I stalled there.
Yeah.
The Biggie was killed to perpetuate the lie.
Okay, there you go.
That makes sense.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. That makes sense. Now I've heard you. Yeah, you say something over and over again, it becomes fact.
Yes.
And quotes becomes fact.
You got to realize half the people. If you were to go down to Compton right now,
yes,
and you were to talk to any of the guys that are 28, 29 years old, okay, about that, they're going to tell you what they believe to be the truth about what happened and what legend has told them is true.
Yes.
And they're going to speak it like it's truth with the most conviction that they might actually even pass a lie detector test because they're that convicted that that's what they know to be true.
That's true.
But those guys were 8 and 9 years old when all this happened.
Oh, wow.
So, and they weren't witnesses, they weren't there.
No.
So I could go down to the hood and I could interview 25 people who could say that they heard from so-and-so that Orlando Anderson did it. But at the end of the day, unless you were physically there or part of it, what use is that?
So what is one of the most controversial things that you've run across that people viscerally have kind of come after you for?
Well, I think the first thing was that we tried to pin the tail on Suge. Okay,
that's natural.
And they said he was in the car.
Yeah, so that's natural.
That was and we got a lot of heat over that.
Okay.
And again, like I said, it wasn't so much the fact that we didn't stick to our guns because we never really came out and said that he was directly responsible for anything.
Right.
We just said he had motive.
Yeah.
Okay. But we took a lot of heat for that. So and that still follows me to this day.
Oh, really does.
People that really haven't read the book, or people that haven't, you can remember from
they see sound bites or whatever.
Movies. Yeah, exactly. R.J. Bond. He's a crazy guy. Suge did it. So I would say that's probably the most controversial thing. The second most controversial thing that we've done is that we came across a letter that was we call it the confession letter. That was given to us by Chris Blatchford at Fox News. And this letter was given to him in 1998. Okay, by a gentleman who is now in prison.
Okay.
But at the time, he was a confidential informant for Fox News for Chris Blatchford.
Oh, wow.
And it was reliable. It helped him, actually tipped him off to a couple of really big burglaries that had happened. CHP's offices got burglarized, and he helped Fox catch the people that did it. And this is back in the days when hard-hitting journalism, 1996. The news was equal in step with the cops, and there was almost this competition that if the news could break the story before the cops got to it, they were even better. It's not like that anymore.
No.
But back in the day, it was.
Yeah.
So there was a letter that was given to Blatchford.
Okay.
And this letter was alleged to have been written by Danny and Malcolm Patton.
Okay.
And the Patton brothers were Pyrus.
Okay. Yes.
And
it's a gang in Los Angeles.
Yes, it was a gang in Los Angeles. I should say that.
Yeah.
That the Blood Gang.
Yeah.
And that they had mapped out this entire, not only confession that they were involved with the shootings, but why the shootings happened, what was all involved with it to begin with.
Yeah.
And in that letter, not only were the Pattons the ones who were alleged to have written the letter, but they named a rapper by the name of Little Half Dead.
Okay, for that name, yeah.
Okay. And Little Half Dead has been kind of this, I mean, if he's not obscure.
Okay.
You have to be pretty hardcore, know the Dog Pound, to know who the players are, to know who he is.
Yeah.
So his name came up, but it was immediately kind of the scoff because nobody ever heard this before. And most of the people that either know him now or may have known him back then, they said, that's impossible. He could never have been the guy. Can you believe it? Now they're saying this guy killed Tupac for stealing demos, and what a terrible thing that is. And I don't know.
Yeah.
Because, again, I certainly have, and then people saying, oh, that's ridiculous. I haven't heard anybody come back with any reason why not.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And the problem was the letter got leaked by the Los Angeles Police Department. We went to the LAPD first with the confession letter, and we met with the 4 arguably highest members of the Los Angeles Police Department. Kirk Albanese, who was assistant chief of police there, and 3 other high-ranking captains in the LAPD, and Darren Dupree, who was Greg Kading's ex-partner, and supposedly the lead detective on the Biggie Tupac killings for the LAPD. And we met with them in an office, and Russ and I gave them a copy of the confession letter. And within several days, that letter leaked. And we weren't going to even publish the names in the confession letter in the book until we'd had a chance to give it to the police first to investigate. Because who wants to be irresponsible like that?
No, of course not.
At the end of the day. So the LAPD leaked the letter. Greg Kading and some other people that he was affiliated with put that letter online, and then started immediately saying, "Oh, how ridiculous this is! Oh, here goes R.J. Bond again." You know, this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
So we did that, but again, like I said, nobody really has come back with, other than, "Oh, that's silly." Nobody's really come back with a reputable
rebuttal to it, basically. Just saying, here's you
There's
said
a
this.
rebuttal online, and what the rebuttal they did is they went into a guy by the name of Robert Soria, who was the guy who gave Chris Blatchford the letter. Okay. And Robert Soria is in prison. Okay. Robert Soria was convicted of something to do with rape. And it had to do with a family member. Oh, wow. And so, you know, not the greatest character, character worthy of reference, right? And so he was largely taken down, and because he was the one who gave the letter to Chris Blatchford, they say, well, he all made it up. He's a paranoid schizophrenic. He made the whole letter up. It's all fake. None of it's true. Okay. And basically attacked the messenger, because at the end of the day, Blatchford had already talked to the Pattons themselves. Soria was only the middle guy. He was just the guy who introduced the two sides. Okay. So for these guys to come out and write the letter. Now, do I know that Malcolm and Danny Patton wrote that letter? No. I have no idea. I wasn't there. Right. Okay. Do I know that Soria wrote the letter? No, I don't know that either. So for somebody to say that Soria did write that letter and that it was some sort of a joke, that's certainly a subject matter I don't think I want to be joking too much about.
No, not at all.
So, and the story goes that they owed Freeway Rick Ross some money. And Freeway Ricky Ross.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And they owed him some money. Okay. And in 1998, Fox News and other news stations like it were still trying to solve the case. Everybody was still hot on the case. It was only a year after Biggie got killed. So they were still hot on the leads if anybody could give them information that would lead up to that. And Chris Blatchford had set up an interview with Pattons, and then they flaked out, and there was this whole thing, and that's kind of where the letter stopped. Okay. But at the time, according to Soria and according to a couple of other people that we've talked to, at that time Fox News was paying a lot of money. And if they thought you could break a story that would get the kind of OJ ratings that you solved Tupac and Biggie, that kind of ratings back in 97, 98, they paid a lot of money for leads.
And back then, there was no big internet happening. Like
That's right.
Some cable, but not a lot of cable like we have today.
Right, that's right. Yeah. And so when you had these people that knew they could get paid some money for it and owed some money to some other people, well, maybe it was worth giving this to. Yes. We've also heard that it was an insurance policy because people were dropping like flies during those days. Yes. If you were anywhere around associated with it, there was some house cleaning happening, right? Yes. And so you're the organizer, you got to get rid of the dead weight, right? You got to get rid of it.
Trim the fat.
Trim the fat. That's right. Lean. Yes. So then I guess Death Row was having its own lean initiative at that point, right?
Apparently, right.
But when it came down to it, people were dropping like flies, and sometimes you can give the press a letter and you say, if anything happens to me, you're free to put this out. Right. Put it out. I want you to put it out right now. I'm scared, but you put it out. Yeah. And so the letter, like I said, they blamed the messenger. They said Soria was a schizophrenic and he made the whole thing up. There's been no proof of that. Soria has refused to. He's in prison. He's refused to back down on his story. He's refused to change his story. But to answer your question about controversial things, that was probably the most controversial thing was the allegation in the letter. I didn't make the allegation, but the allegation in the letter that Lil Half Dead was involved.
Got it.
So, they say, well, R.J. Bond doesn't do any due diligence. Let me tell you, my friend, we do due diligence. One of the things I did with Soria was I started asking him about details. Okay. Because you're talking about stuff that happened 15, 16 years ago. Right. So, and you're in prison. Right. You got a lot of water under the bridge there, right?
Yes.
So, when we were talking to him a little bit more about what was going on, I said, how did you meet Lil Half Dead? I mean, how did you guys meet? How did the Pattons meet Lil Half? Where did they meet? And so he couldn't remember all the details. These were fuzzy, but he started giving me clues and descriptions of where they met. Mm-hmm. And the place that they met was a recording studio in Van Nuys. Okay. They allegedly met at. Okay. And he said he couldn't remember what the name of it was, but it was this place in there. Well, fortunately, that place actually still exists. Oh. And when I jumped on their website and looked at the things, one of the things that they did was they were very early on were a recording studio for Priority Records, which was Lil Half Dead's label.
There you go.
Okay, well, when there's smoke.
Right.
So, and that's kind of where you say, well, after 15 years, how close can you really get? How close can you? But when you start to pass the sniff test with somebody, and they'd already had a track record as a reliable witness anyway, somebody who had information. There's also a videotape.
Okay.
Now, that's the thing. We're trying to get our hands on it right
now.
Okay, but there is a videotape of a meeting that happened in Reseda, I believe it was, where this letter says that the whole plot to take them out, both Suge Knight and Tupac, was hatched.
Okay.
And, so stay tuned for that. I don't have it, so don't come after me.
Yeah, I don't have it. He's trying to get it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and again, does it exist? We've been told it exists.
Right,
I don't know. So we don't know. But that's the other controversial thing.
You're gonna have to come back because it just. Our time is basically up. It's been. The hour went by so. It went by so fast. There's so much. This is why it's so fascinating, this story, because it's never ending. Mm-hmm. There's so many parts to it.
Yeah, and actually, the truth is, and this is what's good as a takeaway, is that we've actually narrowed it down a lot. Okay. When you had a cast of players, it looks like a chorus line.
Right.
You got 80 different players in there, and big names. What's weird about it is if you were to read the story, especially the story we're going to put out, if you were to read the story, like especially with the police, for example, these players' names over the last 20 years keep popping up. It's the same players. You think that there was only 4 people in the LA County Sheriff's Department. You'd think that there was only 4 detectives in the entire LA Police Department.
Right.
These same names, it's a very closed group of people, but these same names just keep popping up over and over again.
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting to me that for the size of the investigation, the more deeply we've gone into it, actually, the more the field narrows.
Interesting.
That is, and so that's the thing. So it can be very complex. Cast of characters.
Oh my God. So I asked 2 questions of my guests, the same 2 questions, and then I'm going to ask you one last question after that.
Okay.
Regarding to Tupac. So I believe that language is something that we could bring us down, bring us up, all kind of stuff. Language is very important. You're a writer, a producer, director.
Absolutely.
Is very important. So what is one word in our vocabulary in the English language that we should take out?
A word in the English language that we should take out.
For our vocabulary. It's like we shouldn't be saying it.
So.
Okay.
Because I'm so tired. There's a whole generation of people right now. They start. I have a 22-year-old son.
Yes.
Who starts his conversations with and his lines with, "So I was thinking about this," or "So what's for dinner?" And you hear it all the time.
Yes.
I don't know how it ever came around.
Yes.
But that's another word I heard. I heard Khloe Kardashian on the Howard Stern show use the word conversate.
Oh, that's another one. I hate that word too.
Conversate. I said, well, who coined that word? I know. So, but I think that the word "so."
And it's funny you say that because, I have a radio show also. I'll tell you on there too. I have a radio show. And on adrenalineradio.com every Friday. And my first show, a long time ago, my mother goes, "Great show, James. You said so like 900 times." Mm-hmm. And I went to listen to it like, you haven't heard me say it until just now. But I've learned to take it out of my vocabulary. But I said so like 900 times. It's like
I catch myself doing it all the time.
Yeah, that's so funny.
So and I ask my wife, "So what's for dinner?"
Right, I love it.
And I don't know if it's just because it's a verbal stall. Or somebody's gathering the thoughts as they say it. Just wait a beat, and then say what you have to say.
And that's why I've learned to take it out of my vocabulary.
Radio tip.
Thank you. And also, what word do you think we should add to our vocabulary?
Definitely not conversate.
I know. I agree on that one.
All right. A word that we should put in.
Maybe we should bring back. People should say. People should say more.
Accountability.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Accountability.
Well, you know about that, don't you?
I just, the funny thing about it is, it to me, it just kills me. I see it, at work. I see it out in public. It just seems to be we're living in a society now where people just do not want to take accountability. Now that's different than responsibility.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Responsibility tends to point blame or tends to fix a source.
Yeah.
Accountability just means stating the truth that happened.
Yes.
Okay. I'm accountable for yes, I did some things that were wrong.
Yeah.
Reggie writes, oh,
Yeah.
oh, Pisha, I did this, I did that.
Right.
No. Accountability is, let's be honest about what really happened. Let's not paint it for what it is. Take accountability for
Yes.
how things were. I'm not asking you to accept responsibility for it,
Right.
but I'm at least asking you to be accountable for what it is.
I like that. RJ Bond, thank you so much. I seriously, you have to come back.
You said you have one more question.
And then I'm about to do it. I'm just taking you again. You're so
No
good.
problem, of course.
Like the last question, and it could be, and it's just a one-word answer. Do you think we will find Tupac's killers?
I do.
Okay. You said it, because he's going to find it. He's going to keep.
There it is.
He might be the one who finds it.
I don't know.
All your investigations.
I don't know. Well, like Pac said, I may not be the one, but I guarantee you that we will somehow motivate or somehow inspire somebody else that will.
I like that. And so you can find books, your DVDs, you're probably online in places.
Tupac187.blogspot.com. That's
Perfect.
the blog that actually we deep dive on a lot of the topics we talk about in the book and in the movies. We really deep dive in there,
Okay.
pictures, videos, all that.
Okay.
So it's all there.
And I'll post that on Breaking Into page. So you guys can actually just click the link and get there if you want to continue the conversation and see more what he's talking about. RJ Bond is great. He's also on Twitter at Justice4Pac, and that's a 4 at the number and Pac, and that's easy to say PAC.
Yep, Justice for Pac.
Justice for Pac. That's right. You're doing it too.
Thanks, man.
And of course, you can find me at Black Hope LA on Twitter, L Black Hope on Instagram, and James Lott Jr. my Facebook page, plus the Breaking Into Facebook page. Go to YouTube, go to iTunes. Black Hollywood Live is there. Subscribe to our page. Find all of our other shows too. We love being here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
From executives Kevin Undergaro, Dario Kristen, Tiana Hobson, and the entire BHL staff, we would like to thank you for supporting Black Hollywood Live, the first online broadcast network dedicated to African American entertainment. For questions and comments, contact us. info@blackhollywoodlive.com. Like us on Facebook, tweet us, or Instagram us at BHL Online. And I am the official voice of Black Hollywood Live, Scipio. Instagram me at KingXOBay. Thanks for tuning in.
Hollywood Undefined.
The views expressed here are those of the host only and do not necessarily reflect the views of BHL or its owners or principals.